Eleanor Brooks pressed her mother's pearl necklace against her throat so hard it left a mark. She wasn't adjusting it. She was reminding herself to breathe, because in 30 seconds she was going to walk into that assembly hall and stand before every important family in Virginia and say something no woman in her position was supposed to say. Not the apology she had been sent to deliver. Something else entirely. Something that would cost her everything. And Eleanor Brooks had already decided she didn't care. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to this channel and follow every part to the end. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. The carriage belonged to the Whitmore family, borrowed for the occasion, which told Eleanor everything she needed to know about how her mother viewed this errand. Ruth Brooks did not borrow things lightly. She borrowed them only when the alternative was admitting how far the family had already fallen. Eleanor sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, the way her mother had instructed. The summer heat pressed through the curtained windows like something alive. Her dress was Charlotte's, altered at the waist and shortened at the hem, and the borrowed silk against her skin felt exactly like what it was. Someone else's life pinned and tucked to fit a woman it was never made for. "You remember what you're going to say," her mother had told her that morning, standing in the doorway of Eleanor's room, with her arms crossed and her voice flat as a ruled line. "You will not deviate. You will not editorialize. You will say exactly what I have told you to say, and you will smile when you say it." Eleanor had looked at her mother's face for a long moment. "Yes, ma'am," she'd said. She had not said she would do it. The Brooks family had been comfortable once. Not wealthy by Virginia's highest standards, but comfortable. A respected name, a judge for a father, a house with enough rooms that the daughters didn't have to share. That had been enough. More than enough, Eleanor had always thought, if you counted what actually mattered. But Charlotte had a way of needing more than what was enough. Charlotte was 26 and beautiful, and had been told so every day of her life by people who should have known better than to make a woman's beauty into her education. She had soft brown curls and a laugh that men across a room turned toward like sunflowers following light. She had been engaged to Edward Whitmore, wealthy, well-connected, the sort of man who collected fine things and considered a Brooks daughter among them, and everything had been arranged and planned and approved and announced. And then Charlotte had done something foolish at a church social. Eleanor still didn't know exactly what it was. She suspected she never would know the full truth of it, because Charlotte had never in her life told a story that didn't flatter herself. What she knew was this: Charlotte had been seen slipping out of the garden with a young man. And the young man's name was Daniel Harper. Daniel Harper was 22. He was the youngest son of a hard-working family, decent and quiet, the kind of young man who helped carry things without being asked and remembered to thank the cook before he left. He had spoken to Charlotte for maybe 10 minutes at the Aldridge social 3 weeks before. He barely knew her name, but Charlotte had needed a villain, so she had given the county one. She told Edward that Daniel Harper had followed her into the garden uninvited, that he had spoken to her in a way no decent man should speak to a lady, that she had been frightened, and that she had fled as fast as propriety allowed, and that she had said nothing until now because she hadn't wanted to make a scene. The story spread the way all such stories spread, fast and in every direction at once. Daniel Harper's family lost 2 contracts within a week. His older brother Caleb, who managed the Harper land and kept the family solvent, was disinvited from the Whitmore summer gathering without explanation. And Daniel himself, 22 years old, decent and quiet, a young man who helped carry things without being asked, walked through his own county with the weight of a lie on his back that he did not know how to put down because he had not been the one to pick it up. Eleanor had watched all of it. She had watched Charlotte cry into her handkerchief and accept the sympathy of every woman in the county. She had watched her father look at the ceiling whenever Daniel's name came up at dinner. She had watched her mother add another layer of detail to Charlotte's story every time she told it, the way a woman adds lace to a dress that doesn't fit, hoping decoration will make the problem disappear. And she had said nothing. For 6 weeks she had said nothing. She had told herself it wasn't her place. She had told herself she didn't know everything. She had told herself that perhaps Charlotte had been frightened, that perhaps there had been something she misunderstood, that perhaps the truth was somewhere in the middle, the way her mother always said the truth was. But she knew. She had known from the first moment Charlotte told the story, because she had watched Charlotte tell it. She had seen the way her sister's eyes moved when she was afraid versus when she was performing fear. She had grown up in the same house, and she knew the difference. Daniel Harper had done nothing, and Eleanor had let him carry it for 6 weeks while she told herself it wasn't her place. That was the part she wasn't sure she would ever fully forgive herself for. The assembly hall belonged to the Fairchild family. The largest gathering space in that part of Virginia opened twice a year for community events and used the rest of the time to remind everyone who held the most land. It smelled of beeswax and fresh-cut flowers and the particular anxious energy of people dressed in their best clothes performing ease they did not feel. Eleanor stepped out of the carriage and heard the sound of it, the hum of conversation, the clink of glass, the way every room with more than 30 people in it produces its own particular weather. She pressed her hand once against her waist, feeling the borrowed silk, and she walked in. The first person she saw was Edward Whitmore, who was standing near the fireplace with a glass of something amber-colored, flanked by 2 men she recognized as minor landowners who spent most of their lives agreeing with whoever they thought would do them the most good. He looked exactly like what he was, a man who had decided to believe an easy story because the easy story protected him from having to ask harder questions. He saw Eleanor at almost the same moment. His expression did something complicated that she couldn't quite read. Surprise, perhaps. Or calculation. Or the particular discomfort of a man who has been looking forward to receiving an apology and has just realized the woman delivering it is not looking at him the way a woman should look when she's about to apologize. Eleanor walked toward him. She was aware of the room shifting. Conversations quieting by degrees. Eyes moving in that unhurried, practiced way people cultivate when they want to watch something without appearing to watch it. She stopped 3 feet from Edward Whitmore and looked at him directly. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. "Miss Brooks." He inclined his head. "I wasn't certain you'd come." "My mother was quite certain I would." Something flickered in his face. "She sent you in her place. She sent me to apologize," Eleanor said. "On behalf of our family, for the, I believe the phrase she used was unfortunate misunderstanding." "Yes." He relaxed slightly, which was exactly what she had expected. "I appreciate the gesture. Your family's reputation has well. It's been a trying season for everyone." "It has," Eleanor agreed. "Most of all for Daniel Harper." The relaxation left his face. The room had gone very quiet. Eleanor kept her voice even, and her hands still at her sides, and she said it clearly, loud enough to carry without shouting the way her father had once taught her to read aloud from the county records in a room full of people who weren't inclined to listen. "I was sent here to apologize, but I will not apologize for a lie." The silence that followed was the particular kind that has weight to it. She felt it. She felt every eye in the room and every held breath, and the precise moment when half the county decided to be scandalized and the other half decided to pretend they hadn't heard. Edward Whitmore stared at her. "I beg your pardon," he said. "I don't believe you need to," Eleanor said. "I believe you heard me clearly. Miss Brooks." His voice dropped the way men's voices do when they want to remind a woman of the full extent of what she's risking. "You should have a care for what you're suggesting." "I'm not suggesting anything," she said. "I'm telling you plainly that Daniel Harper did not pursue my sister. He did not frighten her. He spoke to her for a few minutes at the Aldridge social, and then went back to his family's table, and my sister used his name 6 weeks later because she needed someone to use. I have watched this county carry his name in its mouth like a stone for 6 weeks, and I will not stand in this room and offer an apology on behalf of that." Edward took a step closer. His voice was low and hard. "Do you understand what you're doing to your family right now?" "Yes," Eleanor said. "Do you understand what your silence has been doing to Daniel Harper's?" She felt him before she saw him. A shift in the room's attention, a slight reorientation of where people were looking, and then a voice from somewhere to her left, not loud, not hurried, but carrying the kind of quiet that made other sounds step back from it. "I'll thank you to lower your voice when you're speaking to a lady, Mr. Whitmore." Eleanor turned. Caleb Harper was 34 broad-shouldered in the way of men who work their own land rather than supervising others who do it with dark eyes and the particular stillness of someone who has learned that stillness is more formidable than motion. He was looking at Edward Whitmore with an expression that wasn't anger exactly. It was something quieter than anger and considerably more dangerous. He was also, Eleanor realized looking at her, not the way men looked at women at assemblies, measuring, weighing, cataloging. He was looking at her the way a man looks when he has just heard something unexpected and is taking a moment to determine whether it is actually real. "Mr. Harper," Edward said, and his voice had the edge of a man who knows he's on uncertain ground and is trying to sound like he isn't. "This is a private conversation. It stopped being private when you stepped toward Miss Brooks," Caleb said. He didn't move. He didn't have to. "And it will remain my concern until she has said her piece without being crowded for it." Edward looked between them. Then he looked at Eleanor with an expression that had curdled from discomfort into something closer to contempt. "You've brought shame on your family today," he said. "I hope whatever this is," he gestured vaguely between her and Caleb, "I hope it's worth it." He walked away. The room absorbed his departure and then went back to the business of staring at Eleanor. She turned to face Caleb Harper directly. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "No, ma'am," he agreed. "But I wanted to hear what you were going to say," and he was making it difficult, despite everything, despite the weight of 50 pairs of eyes and the knowledge of exactly what she had just done to her family's standing. Eleanor felt something that was almost dangerously like the beginning of a smile. "You believed me," she said. "Not a question, a recognition." Caleb looked at her steadily. "I believed you the moment you walked in that door," he said. "The question is whether you have anything to back it with, because this county will not settle for your word against your sister's, Miss Brooks. They never do when the word belongs to the quieter woman." "I know that," Eleanor said. "Do you have evidence?" "Not yet," she said. "But I know where to find it." He studied her for a moment. Something in his face shifted, not softened exactly, but opened slightly the way a door opens when someone finally knocks, who has a right to be there. "Then we have work to do," Caleb Harper said. She walked out of the Fairchild Assembly Hall 20 minutes later into the full weight of a Virginia summer afternoon, and she stood in the heat and let it press down on her, and she breathed. She had just publicly accused her sister of lying. She had just refused the apology her mother had sent her to deliver. She had just spoken to Caleb Harper, whose family her sister had wronged in a room full of people who were already assembling the story they would tell about it. She thought about Daniel Harper, 22 years old, and decent and quiet, walking through his own county with a lie on his back for 6 weeks. She thought about her mother's face when she found out. She thought about the borrowed silk dress against her skin, and she thought, "I would do it again." She pressed her hand once against the pearls at her throat, and for the first time since her mother clasped them there that morning, they didn't feel like a warning. They felt like armor. Eleanor did not go home immediately. She knew better. Her mother would have heard within the hour this county had never lacked for people willing to carry bad news quickly, and going home now would mean walking into the storm before she had anything solid to carry with her. Ruth Brooks could be managed, but only if Eleanor arrived with more than conviction. Conviction her mother would call stubbornness. Evidence was harder to dismiss. She thought of what Caleb had said. "This county will not settle for your word against your sister's." He was right. She had known it even as she was speaking. And she had spoken anyway because 6 weeks of silence had already cost Daniel Harper more than she could calculate, and she had decided this morning in her borrowed dress that the accounting was going to change today, whether she had every piece in place or not. But Caleb was still right. She needed proof. She needed letters, dates, names. She needed to trace Charlotte's story back to its beginning and find where the seams showed. And she needed to do it before her mother found another way to bury it. She was sitting on the low stone wall outside the Fairchild property, her hands in her lap, running through everything she knew when she heard footsteps and looked up. Caleb Harper stood a few feet away. He had a glass of water, not spirits she noticed, which he held out toward her with a matter-of-fact directness that somehow made it less like a courtesy and more like a statement. She took it. You didn't go back inside, she said. Neither did you. I'm thinking. So am I. He sat on the wall at a respectable distance and rested his forearms on his knees. Miss Brooks, you said you know where to find evidence. I'd like to understand what you mean by that. She told him. She told him about the letters, 3 of them, that she had seen Charlotte writing in the weeks after the social letters she'd thought at the time were to Edward. But Edward had mentioned offhandedly at a dinner the Brooks family had hosted that he hadn't heard from Charlotte in some time and found it strange, which meant the letters were to someone else. And Charlotte's private correspondence went into the small cedar box she kept under her window seat. She told him about the Aldridge social itself, that she had been there, and that she had watched Daniel Harper arrive with his family and stay near them for nearly the entire evening, and that she could give him 3 names of people who had been standing close enough to see the same thing she had seen. She told him about the evening Charlotte had come home and sat across from Eleanor at the supper table and eaten her food and said nothing. Nothing with the particular too calm face of someone who has already decided what story they are going to tell and is running it through for practice. Caleb listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The box, he said. Can you get into it? The key is on Charlotte's dressing table. She's never kept it hidden because she's never believed anyone in that house would go looking. And will they go looking? Eleanor looked at him. I already have, she said. He held her gaze. What did you find? The letters aren't to Edward, she said. They're to a man named Garrett. I don't know his last name yet, but I know 3 things Charlotte was meeting him. Charlotte was afraid he would say so, and Charlotte chose Daniel Harper's name to replace his. The silence between them had a different quality now, not the shocked silence of the assembly hall, but the working silence of 2 people who have just realized they are standing at the beginning of something that will require everything they have. Why are you telling me this? Caleb asked. Not suspicious. Careful, because your brother has been carrying your family's name through this county for 6 weeks, and nobody who knew the truth has said a word, Eleanor said. I said nothing for 6 weeks. I told myself it wasn't my place. I was wrong, and I am correcting it. He looked at her for a long time. Miss Brooks, he said quietly, you do understand that when this comes out, all of it your sister will not recover easily. Your family's name. My family's name is already what it is, Eleanor said. I would rather it be honest. He nodded slowly. All right, Caleb Harper said. Then we start with the witnesses from the Aldridge social. I know 2 of them already. If you can give me the 3rd name, I'll send word tonight. Martin Aldridge himself, Eleanor said. He was standing by the punch table when Daniel arrived. He spoke to him. He'll remember. Caleb stood and offered his hand to help her down from the wall. She took it. His grip was steady and entirely businesslike, and he released it the moment she was on her feet. I'll be at the county hall tomorrow morning, he said. If you can be there by 9 o'clock. I will, she said. He turned to go, then stopped. Miss Brooks. She looked at him. You said you were wrong, he said. About staying silent. Yes. Most people who are wrong about something like that, he said, never say so, not even to themselves. He touched the brim of his hat, a brief exact gesture, and walked back toward the hall. Eleanor stood in the summer heat with the empty glass in her hand, and the borrowed silk against her skin, and the full weight of what she had set in motion, pressing down on her like a physical thing. She was not afraid of it. She was something much more complicated than afraid. She was certain, and in a life that had spent 24 years asking her to be uncertain, to be quiet, to be borrowed and altered and pinned to fit someone else's shape. Certainty felt like the most extraordinary thing she had ever put on. Eleanor arrived home before her mother did. She had not planned it that way, but she was grateful for it. Those 15 minutes of silence in the front parlor, the summer air pressing in through the open windows, the sound of the house settling around her like something holding its breath. She sat in the straight-backed chair nearest the door, not because she needed to rest, but because she wanted to be seen the moment Ruth Brooks walked in. She did not want to be found in the kitchen or upstairs or anywhere that gave her mother the advantage of looking down. She heard the carriage before she heard her mother's voice. Then she heard her mother's voice before she saw her face. Eleanor Ann Brooks. Ruth Brooks did not slam doors. She was too disciplined for that. But she closed this one with a precision that communicated everything a slam would have, and considerably more. She stood in the center of the parlor and looked at her daughter with the expression Eleanor had seen exactly twice before in her life, once when Charlotte had broken a neighbor's window at 13, and once when Judge Brooks had lost the Callaway case and come home with whiskey on his breath. It was the expression of a woman who has had something taken from her and has not yet decided what to do about it. "Do you have any idea," her mother said, "what you have done?" It was not a question, so Eleanor did not treat it as one. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "I told the truth. You told your version of the truth in a room full of people who have been waiting for this family to give them something to talk about." Ruth's voice was flat and controlled, and more frightening than shouting. "You stood in the Fairchild Hall and publicly accused your sister of lying. You embarrassed Edward Whitmore. You embarrassed this family. And you did it wearing Charlotte's dress, which means every person in that room knows exactly what you think of yourself relative to her." Eleanor felt that last part land. She hadn't thought of the dress that way. She hadn't thought about what it looked like from the outside, the younger sister in the older sister's altered clothes, doing the older sister's damage. She filed it away and kept her voice even. "Daniel Harper has been walking through this county for 6 weeks with a lie on his back," she said. "I know it is a lie because I know Charlotte, and I know Charlotte because I have spent 24 years in this house, watching her make the same decision she made 6 weeks ago, to protect herself at whatever cost, and to expect someone else to handle what gets left behind." Charlotte was frightened. "Charlotte was caught," Eleanor said quietly. "There is a difference, Mother. You know there is." The silence that followed was the kind that tells you a conversation has just changed into something else entirely. Ruth Brooks looked at her daughter for a long moment. Something moved through her face. Not guilt, not exactly, but something adjacent to it, something that recognized guilt without quite being willing to claim it. "You don't know everything," her mother said. "Then tell me what I'm missing." Ruth turned away from her. "This conversation is over," she said. "Tomorrow morning you will send a note to the Whitmore family expressing your regrets. You will say you were overwrought. You will—" "I will not," Eleanor said. Her mother stopped. "I will not retract it," Eleanor said. "I will not write to the Whitmores. I will not say I was overwrought. I will not tell another lie on top of Charlotte's lie and call it protecting the family." She stood up. "If you want this conversation to be over, then it is over. But the truth is not going back in the box, Mother. I took it out in front of 50 people, and it is going to stay out." She walked past her mother and up the stairs. Charlotte was waiting in the hallway. Eleanor had expected that too. In a general way, Charlotte always waited on high ground when she could manage it, and the upstairs hallway gave her the advantage of position. What Eleanor had not expected was the expression on her sister's face, because it wasn't anger. It was something much harder to deal with. It was fear. Charlotte was beautiful, even frightened, which had always seemed to Eleanor like one of the more unfair arrangements the world had made. Her eyes were red at the edges, her curls slightly disordered, and she was gripping the doorframe of her bedroom with both hands, like someone steadying herself on a ship in rough weather. "You told them," Charlotte said. "I told them the part I know," Eleanor said. "I didn't tell them about Garrett." Charlotte went very still. "How do you know that name?" she whispered. "I found the letters," Eleanor said. "I wasn't looking for them. I found them 3 weeks ago when I was straightening your room because you asked me to and then forgot you'd asked. I read enough to understand. And then I put them back." Charlotte stared at her. "You put them back," she repeated. You knew, and you didn't say anything, and you put them back." "Yes." "Why?" Eleanor looked at her sister. The honest answer was complicated, and Charlotte was owed the complicated version. "Because I wasn't ready to do what I did today," she said. "Because I told myself there might be something I didn't understand. Because I didn't want to be the one who broke this family open." She paused. "I was wrong. I waited 6 weeks too long, and Daniel Harper paid for every one of those weeks, and I will have to live with that." Charlotte's hands dropped from the doorframe. "You don't understand what Garrett," she started. "I don't need to understand what Garrett did or didn't do," Eleanor said. "Whatever happened with him, Charlotte, Whatever frightened you, whatever you needed to escape from the answer, was not Daniel Harper's name. You chose an innocent man's name because he was convenient and you thought he was expendable. And I need you to understand that I am not angry at you for being frightened. I am angry at you for what you chose to do with it. Charlotte was crying now. Eleanor watched it happen and felt the complicated pull of it, the instinct to comfort her sister that had been trained into her since childhood, wrestling with the clearer knowledge of exactly who was paying for Charlotte's tears. "He's going to hate me," Charlotte said. "Daniel Harper is going to hate me." "He might," Eleanor said. "That is a consequence of what you did. It is not something I can fix for you. And Caleb Harper." Charlotte's voice broke slightly on the name. Did you tell him about—" "No," Eleanor said. "Not yet, but Charlotte." She waited until her sister looked at her directly. "The letters are going to come out. When this goes to evidence, when we start tracing dates and witnesses, Garrett's name is going to appear. You need to decide now whether you are going to get ahead of it or get buried by it." She left her sister in the hallway and went to her own room and closed the door. She sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed. She had not cried yet. She wasn't sure she was going to. There was too much still moving, too much still in motion, and she had learned a long time ago that tears had to wait for stillness, and there was no stillness yet. Her father came to her room after supper. Judge Amos Brooks was a tall man, gone slightly soft at the middle, with a careful face and the particular quality of a good man who had spent too many years choosing the path of least resistance and had gotten very skilled at not looking directly at what that cost other people. He knocked before he entered, which he had always done, and which Eleanor had always taken as a small indication that he respected her more than he was willing to say out loud. He sat in the chair near the window, and he held his hat in his hands, and he said without preamble, "You're right." Eleanor looked at him. "About Daniel Harper," he said. "You're right. I've known it for at least 4 weeks." The words landed slowly, the way heavy things do. 4 weeks, Eleanor said. "Martin Aldridge spoke to me privately," her father said. "After the story had already spread. He told me he'd been near the door when Daniel arrived at the social, and that the boy hadn't been within 30 feet of Charlotte all evening. I thanked Martin for telling me, and I told him I would look into it." "And you didn't," Eleanor said. Her father's hands tightened on his hat. "No," he said, "I did not." The silence between them had the quality of something that had been a long time coming, and had finally arrived, and was not going to leave quickly. "Why?" Eleanor said. "Because Charlotte's engagement to Edward Whitmore was already announced," her father said. "Because if I'd opened that door, everything inside it would have come out, and I didn't know what everything was. I was afraid of what I'd find." He looked at his hands. "That is not an excuse. I'm telling you why, not asking you to accept it as a reason." Eleanor looked at her father. This man she had admired, and sometimes loved, and often been quietly exasperated by. And she understood, perhaps for the first time with real clarity, that he was a person and not just a role. A person who had made a bad decision for human reasons and had spent 4 weeks knowing it. "I need your help," she said. He looked up. "Not to cover it," she said quickly. "The other direction. I need access to the county records from the Aldridge social, the guest register, the date logs. And I need you to be willing to stand behind what Martin Aldridge told you." Her father was quiet for a long moment. "Your mother will not recover from this easily," he said. "No," Eleanor agreed. "She won't." Charlotte has to reckon with what she did," Eleanor said. "That's not something I can protect her from, Papa, and you protecting her is what got us here." It was the hardest thing she had said to anyone that day, and she had said several hard things. She watched it move through her father's face. He nodded once slowly, like a man agreeing to a weight he knows is going to be difficult to carry. "I'll get you the records," he said, "and I'll speak to Martin." She met Caleb Harper at the county hall at 9 o'clock the next morning as agreed. He was already there when she arrived, which she had expected. He was the kind of man who arrived before he said he would and did not mention it. He had a folder of papers on the table in front of him. She could see dates, names, columns of figures she didn't immediately understand, and he looked up when she came in with the same steady directness he had shown in the Fairchild Hall. "I have the Aldridge guest register," she said, setting her father's papers on the table, "and a statement from Martin Aldridge confirming where Daniel was standing that evening. And my father is willing to testify that Martin told him the same story 4 weeks ago." Caleb looked at her. "Your father," he said. "He knew," Eleanor said. "For 4 weeks. He chose not to act. He's choosing differently now." Caleb absorbed this without visible reaction, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he processed information all the way through without letting it out on the surface until he'd finished with it. "I have something too," he said. He pushed a paper toward her. It was a letter. Not one of Charlotte's. She could see immediately that the handwriting was different, masculine, and somewhat hurried. The name at the bottom was Garrett Sims. Eleanor looked up. "Garrett Sims," she said. "You know who he is." "He was a merchant who passed through this county twice last year," Caleb said. "He had dealings with our family, a timber contract that fell through. He's not from Virginia. He went back to Richmond sometime in the spring." He paused. "I did not know about him and Charlotte until this morning. I had Daniel ask around quietly. One of our farmhands recognized the name when I described the situation." Eleanor read the letter quickly. It was not intimate exactly, but it was familiar in a way that made the nature of the correspondence unmistakable. Garrett Sims had written to Charlotte asking